Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach Mates. Well, it's Thursday, so that means it's time for our Q&A podcast. I've just got Thomas here tonight, so I seem to be the only stable person here at the minute, but that's fine. So I'm just gonna get stuck straight into it. Our first question tonight comes from Callum, and this is actually a good question. I like this one. So Callum currently has Mills, Neil, McRae, Keys, Cripps, Petrarca, and Tom Green in his midfield, which is a very impressive midfield. But he's worried about not owning Oliver, Brayshaw, and Steele. Should he plan to upgrade to some of these in the future, or do you think he can get away with his current line? I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, because I have a very strong opinion on this one.
So I think if you look at his line, it's actually pretty impressive. How, I don't know, obviously, as he sent through his team, so we don't know what his other lines look like. But from the names he's given us, that it's pretty good midfield. So I wouldn't be desperately trying to trade anyone out to bring in the likes of Oliver, Brayshaw, and Steele. However, you'd be looking out of the three that he's mentioned, probably Oliver and Steele are the ones that you want to bring in at some point, or you want to finalise your teams with. Green is the one that I think is most likely to not finish in the top 8 mids. Petrarca, obviously, I own him as well. He's prone to a bit of an up and down scoring, and Keys is probably the other one that can maintain hundreds, but his ceiling is probably not as high as the others. So it's one that at the moment you'll be fine with, but I think as the season rolls on, like for myself, I've pretty much got Trapp. Petrarca is my lowest mid currently. We plan to bring in McRae and someone else to finish off my mids. So like you can see that pretty much, most people by the end of your completion of your team will pretty much have mostly pretty strong midfield. So you got to be careful with finishing too early. And at the moment, you'd be in a good position, but you'd want to be looking to upgrade to, I think, minimum Oliver. I think everyone will need that Oliver by the end of the season. We know how strong his ceiling is. And Steele as well is very good as well with his ceiling as well. So I think, those two out of the three are probably must-haves by the end of the season. But what are your thoughts, Nathan? Obviously, you're pretty strong on this question.
Yeah, I am. I think Oliver is a must-have. So I went through and had a look. So Mills is number 5, Neil's number 1, McRae's number 2, Keys is 8th, Cripps is 14th. But if you add his average score to his total score, he goes up to 2nd. Petrarca is 11th and Green's 9th. Now, Oliver's currently the 4th midfielder, but I would expect him to overtake Boak, who's currently 3rd by the end of the year. I think Oliver will burn you if you don't have him. Brayshaw and Steele, I think you can probably get away with not having them with that midfield around them, given that you've pretty much already got your midfield set. But I think you will need Oliver at some point, just because I think he's going to burn you if you haven't got him. I think the 4 best midfielders this year, at least from so far, Neil, McRae, Cripps, and Oliver. And I think the fact you've got 3 of them is good. And I think Oliver's the one that you're going to need, because I think he's going to burn you if you haven't got him at the back end of the year when Melbourne really get going in the back half of the year, because they seem to be just winning it at the minute. Like, they haven't got their full game going, but I think come the second half of the year, they're going to ramp that up. And I think you will want his big scores. Whereas I think Brayshaw's the one I'd be happy to pass on him and let him be a top 8 midfielder and burn me, because he hasn't done it before. Whereas Oliver and Steele both have. And as for Jack Steele, I think he's probably going to be a good option in a couple of weeks again. I think given he's got that 75 or whatever he scored on the weekend and he's cycled now for 2 weeks. So, yeah, I think Oliver's a must-have. I think you can probably pass on Brayshaw with that midfield, and I think Jack Steele's one who you could potentially look at getting in. But otherwise, I think your line there is pretty good, Callum. And I do agree with you as well, Thomas, about Tom Green. I don't think he's going to be top 8. I think he might be about top 15. I think he maybe might fall into that Travis Spoke category where he sort of starts off well and then sort of plummets in the second half. But time will tell on that one.
Yeah, 100%.
So Tim, thoughts on bringing in Darcy Cameron, who's 368,000 with a -8 break even. So obviously Grundy's not in there now. He's rucking against Jordan Sweet. So I'm not sure if you've seen the teams, Thomas, but I know this was done before you knew the teams. But Martin's actually been managed this week, so he's playing against Jordan Sweet. So does that change your opinion on bringing in Darcy Cameron?
For me, like personally, I think it's a little bit difficult if I want to get McRae. If I had to get McRae and got in someone like a Brayshaw instead, I'd heavily consider someone like a Cameron. I think with the news that Sweet's rocking solo, it seems like with English out with the flu and Steph Martin's knee injury, it makes Darcy Cameron a pretty viable option. Because you can see there, he scored 115 and 108, and one of them was against, I think, Jared Witts, I'm pretty sure, who's one of the premier rucks of the competition. So he seems to get around the ground pretty well. He's done pretty well so far as the primary ruck in the side. And I think he'll pretty much score quite well, or even quite largely on Friday night, I would suspect, because I would assume he'd get on top of Sweet. I haven't seen Sweet play a lot. Obviously, he doesn't get picked a lot. But he's one, I think, that if you can get him this week, I think this is a week to get him in. But I think you'll be mindful that he's not going to be a premium, because as soon as Grundy comes back, obviously, Nathan, you might have some more intel on how the setup works at the moment and how going forward with when Grundy does come back, if that impacts it SuperCoach-wise, or if he comes back even within, the SuperCoach relevant season. But, yeah, for me, I've got probably other issues to worry about with regards to bringing into potentially McRae. But yeah, this would be the last week, I think, with the -8 break even. He's going to bum up in cash again, probably about 30, 40K. I'm not too sure, Nathan. You might have to back me up on the stats there, but he's going to be close to 400K, I'm assuming. And then once he hits above 400K, it's a bit of a hard situation where you're in, where you'd be getting him for a keeper position rather than a stepping stone about upgrading him into someone else. But this is the week to get him in, I think, and probably the last week to get him in if you are considering Darcy Cameron.
Yeah, so his break even's -8. If he gets 73, he's going to go up 36,000. So that's going to push him above 400,000. So yeah, I think this is the last week. For me personally, I'm not going near him. I think he's too hit and miss. I know he scored well the last couple of weeks, but I think as soon as Grundy comes in, I think he becomes irrelevant again. And I don't think you can afford to be bringing in players who you're going to get rid of again at this stage. And I think you're going to do that with Darcy Cameron. So, yeah, I think he's a pass for me, but I've been happy with how he's gone. Without Grundy being in the side, I think he stood up reasonably well. So Neville. So
trades. At this stage, I think. I was just going to say, Nathan, before you go on to his question, if you've got enough trades to do so, I'd be in the position to potentially bring Cameron in. But I think a few people will be in that situation. There wouldn't be too many people that are in that position to do so.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's probably fair enough too. So Neville has brought in McRae and Rioli for O'Driscoll and Cornelio. But it means that he has to play Rioli on the field. Stick with this or bring in Buku Kamis onto my
Yeah.
defensive bench and play Sam DeConing forward. And can I make it work with NOD going out or Jason Horn-Fraser? Which one's the keeper? Now, I'm going to interrupt you here, Thomas, and I think, Neville, I think you've beaten yourself here, buddy, by bringing in Greg Clark, who right now is probably going to be burning you this week, given the carnage that's gone on this week. You might be able to manufacture something, but this is hopefully a lesson learnt for people out there to not trade in rookies until they've played their 2 games. All right, because they're not going to go up in value. They're not going to change. Yes, he scored 104, but at this stage, this is when players start getting rested, and it's happened all at once. And now you've got Greg Clark just sitting there on your bench. You've probably missed out on Carroll as well because you've gone for Clark instead. So anyway, that's my rant. Back to the actual question here. I think McRae and Rioli, yes, I think they're good ins. I think if you're going to go a defensive option, I think I'd be going Declan Mountford myself. I know he hasn't been named, but he's 102k. He's a defender midfielder. He's on the bubble. And if you've still got Nick Dacos, which I think, yeah, you've still got Nick Dacos, you can flick him between the midfield and the back line, which I think come the latter part of the year will be very valuable. But what do you think, Thomas? I've had my rant. What do you think about what he should do here, Thomas?
Yeah, as you said, he's in a bit of an awkward situation where I think O'Driscoll, which is NOD, and Horn-Francis are both out this week.
Yes, they are. I think O'Driscoll's out for 6 weeks.
You probably have to change your trade plans, Neville, with regards to that because has he traded him out? I think he's traded out O'Driscoll and kept Horn-Francis from the looks of his trades. I like the idea of what he's done so far with McRae and Rioli out for O'Driscoll and Cornelio. However, with the news of, and I guess we'll touch on this throughout the podcast, about Leon Cameron being resigning today, who knows what that means for the GWS players and their roles, how that changes, if anything does change and things like that. So I don't know if it's worth holding on to Cogs for one more week and seeing how he goes under Mark McVeigh and see if he gets more midfield time, because the last couple of weeks he's predominantly playing forward, which has kind of affected his score a little bit. But I wouldn't bring the Buku Kamis on. He played key forward on the weekend. Could do all right against Collingwood, but he's probably not going to score too well. So you probably have to reshuffle it a little bit. I like the idea of bringing in McRae into the side, but from the looks of things, I'd kind of just keep it as it is, as you've done so far. I don't mind Rioli on field. He's a pressure forward, and we'll touch more on that later with some other guys have put in questions about the rookies this week. I think you can still bring in Carroll this week. He's probably not as high in my rankings with regards to rookies, just because of Hewitt coming back this week and the position he's going to play. Has he? No, he's on the extended interchange bench, I'm pretty sure.
Was he? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I think Hewitt's on the extended interchange bench, has to pass a fitness test on Friday to play 100%. But so far, signs are looking good for him. But yeah, it is what it is, and I think you're probably going to have to keep McRae in your side. I like that move. And Horn-Francis, I guess he's not playing, doesn't really make a big deal because you got Greg Clark in the side. So yeah, I wouldn't adjust your trades too much. It seems like you've got a pretty solid team on the park. Sam DeConning, as I say, bring on Cammy. I'm like, I'd rather stick with Rioli on field than playing Sam DeConning forward, I think. Because Buka Cammy wouldn't bring in this week at all, just because he didn't score overly well in his first game. It's not like the other rookies that scored extremely well. So yeah, I'd stick with what you've done so far. I'm pretty sure, and you can always get rid of Tom Francis next week because he won't drop more in price.
Yeah, and if you want to bring in Camus, bring him in next week when he's on the bubble because you've already been burnt by Greg Clark, so you don't want to go down the path again of bringing in someone who hasn't played their 2 games.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because it's gonna burn you. I think it's burnt our fellow podcast member Jonas, who's also got an owner of Greg Clark, and he's now counting the cost of that move, given that he hasn't been named. But what about his final question here? What about NOD or Jason Horn-Francis? Which one's the keeper?
Well, Jonas going to answer that one. He's popped in now.
Oh, has he?
Yeah, I think you've seen it.
Oh, he has popped in.
Just completely burnt him up and thinking he's not there.
I don't regret the Greg Clark thing because it's not like he's injured. He's still a good trade-in target. But can I make it work with? Well, neither's the keeper, to be honest. But they're both not playing this week. So I'd be trading both of them out. But if you're looking for cover, obviously you go for JHF because he'll be back hopefully sooner rather than later compared to Nod, who's out for 6.
Yep, and we now have to redo the whole intro again because I've just burnt Jonas by saying he wasn't coming tonight.
It's all right.
So anyway, well, welcome, Jonas.
Thank you.
Right, so we got sent in this by Kobe. So thoughts on this side with potential trading options. So I had a look at this at first, and on the field he's got a good side, but I think there's a couple of issues with some rookies that he's got here. But I'll let you guys touch on.
Have you changed it? Because we can't see it.
Yeah, I've changed it. Has that gone through now?
I haven't. I can't see it.
Nah, it's still on Neville's question.
Hang on. We've just got some technical issues here. Hang on. I'm going to reshare it. Hang on. Hey, has that come through now?
Yeah.
That works.
Okay. So we got sent in this by Kobe. So thoughts on this side with potential trading options. So I like what you've got on the field, Kobe, but I think there's some issues here with some of the rookies that you've got. But I might throw to you on this one, Jonas, since you've just joined the podcast. What do you think about this side here from Kobe, and where are some trades that he can potentially look at?
Jeez, that defense is very solid. I'm a bit envious of that. Sinclair's fallen away a bit, but Steino can talk about him in a sec because I think his 3-round average is like under 90, so that's a bit of a concern with regards to him being top 6. But for now, no issues in defense. Yeah, so as Nathan was saying, on field, you've got a pretty solid team. Tom Green, maybe not top 8, but he's been scoring well, so you can't complain. But there is a bit of a concern with the cash generation aspect of things. I'm not sure if Skinner returns. Cox, Hoff, and Nankervis are all basically donuts, like they're not playing. So that's a huge issue. And I think the thing I'd be prioritizing right now is trying to get some of that dead weight off your bench in time for the buys, so you have some rookies playing on the field, because at the moment, if you're heading into the buys and you have no one on the bench you can rely on to score, it's going to be carnage. So I'd be looking at getting rid of probably Hoff, at least because he's made a tiny bit of money, and a Skinner, and downgrading to maybe a Hamilton or the like. He's got Carroll and Rioli, so that's something. But I think that's what I'd be prioritising at the moment, because you've got Hewitt on the bench. He comes back and fills that defence. Dunkley goes into the forward line. So I think you're well stocked in that regard, but come cash generation, it's going to be a bit of an issue. And I see he's got a fair bit of money in the bank, so maybe you can afford to go Hoff and like a Skinner down and then maybe get in like a Darcy Cameron is probably the perfect a player for this person's situation, because he's going to make some decent money in the short term and score half well, and then you can flip him at the end of his buys. But yeah, that's what I'd be prioritizing at the moment. He's got a lot of premiums. Maybe looking at getting some of those players who can make 130, 150k and still be a serviceable scorers is where I'd be looking at going for at the moment. So 2 down, and then try and maybe get another rookie up to Darcy Cameron.
Yeah, I think I would probably go along with that too. Do you have anything to add, Tom, or what do you? I know Jonas touched on Jack Sinclair. Are you a little bit concerned about him, given you were so hot on him at the start of the year, and he has sort of fallen away a bit? But have you got any final thoughts on his side and where he possibly can look at?
This was my only concern with Sinclair going forward is what the impact of the likes of Zach Jones and Billings now coming back into the side would do to him. The issue with him was he was just kind of consistently racking the pill up, floating across the midfield and halfback. And then once that started to dry up in more heavily contested games, you could see his scoring suffer a little bit. Not to the fact that it's a concern that you have to trade him out. Like, no way. This is a situation where you'd be looking at him and almost reconsidering whether non-owners want to bring him in at a discounted price. I don't know what the impact. I don't think Billings' coming in will impact it too much. I think Billings comes straight in for Dan Butler, who goes out with an Achilles injury. So I think Sinclair will play the same role. Obviously, against Geelong, it will be quite difficult again for him to get a lot of the ball on easily. But I think a big indicator of how Sinclair will go as well is where Brad Hill plays, because Brad Hill plays off the half back line, or that connector between back line and midfield kind of impacts Sinclair's score a little bit, because Hill takes a lot of Sinclair's possessions away. But if Hill manages to play on a wing, which he should, or a half forward like the number 6 role where he's pushing into the midfield as well, linking the ball up from midfield to forward, then I'd say Sinclair gets a lot more of the ball. However, against the Cats, they've got a fair few talented half forwards themselves, so I wouldn't be surprised if Sinclair might have to be a bit more accountable defensively this week against them, and won't be as free roaming as the last couple of weeks. Having said that, though, the last 2 weeks we've played, obviously Melbourne, where we got dominated around the ground, and probably he wasn't able to get as much of the possessions where he wanted to, and especially against Port Adelaide as well in pretty shocking conditions. I mean, you couldn't expect him to turn up there when you could barely touch the ball. But just looking further at Kobe's side, I agree with what a lot of Jonas said. Bringing in Darcy Cameron wouldn't be definitely a bad idea, and it'd be a nice POD potentially going forward. I mean, you've got a pretty stacked back line. Forwards, I'd be looking as you might have mentioned beforehand, Jonas, about moving Dunkley back forward and bringing in a mid if you can this week, considering you've got a pretty stacked mid. Other than that, in putting Dunkley forward will enable you to strengthen both your forward line and midfield, because you're bringing in a pure midfield in that case. Also, whether or not you want to getting rid of Zach Butters is one that you'd be looking to potentially get rid of. He's been pretty shocking, but they play North Melbourne this weekend, so who knows, he could turn up pretty easily there. But yeah, if you're able to get Dunkley back down and get Rioli off field and play him as a bench option, and then get even a Rosas up to a premium, considering that he's pretty much stagnating cash, it's probably not the worst option in the world. And yeah, you're in a pretty good position so far, I think, with a pretty healthy amount of cash in the bank and 2 lines which are pretty much close to full at the moment in your defence and midfield. But I'd be looking to strengthen your forward line for sure. I think there's some holes in there a little bit. You can't really rely on Cogs and Butters at the moment. Playing F3 and F4 and Taranto as well has been poor for the last couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. This question comes from Causa_B21. This isn't the first time he's asked a question, so he's obviously a regular listener. So who should I pick out of Darcy, Brayshaw, or Oliver this week? I think we've already touched on Oliver as being an option. Well, at least someone who you should have in your side. And I think we've done it with Brayshaw as well. But I want to get your thoughts here on Sean Darcy, Tom. So 595,000, break even of 75. When this guy plays, he just always scores, but he's just a bit injury prone. So what do you think about Darcy?
Yeah, definitely someone I'm looking at towards getting him ASAP, potentially with the likes of Bruce going out for him. Having said that, he's one that, yeah, he obviously scored 178 against Goldstein, but you know, Rocks did pretty well against Goldstein, even though Goldstein himself does pretty well. But he's one that, yeah, sub 600k for Darcy is a pretty good price to get with a break even of 75. Obviously, we haven't seen your team causes, so it's a bit hard to say. But if you're looking for, if you have your, you know, a Sean Darcy in your calculations this week, wouldn't be the worst time to pick him up. They play Gold Coast, don't they, Freo?
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so that might not be the best idea. He plays Wits, which is not an easy task. And the only issue with Sean Darcy, which has turned me off every other year, is he just gets injured time after time after time with that dodgy knee. He almost plays most games half injured, like he goes off and comes back on, goes off and comes back on. He can't really string it together, which is a bit of a concern. And they, you know, would always want to protect him until he's fully fit and play the likes of Rory Lobb and Lloyd Meek as well in combination. So, yeah, definitely one that you'd want to keep an eye on. If you want to take the risk this week, go for it. But, yeah, as I said, he does play Wits, which is no easy task. I mean, Darcy Cameron scored pretty well against him, but, yeah, it could be a situation where, because Darcy doesn't get much ball around the ground, unlike Cameron, where he can go up forward and provide a bit of a threat, I think they'll kind of nullify each other with regards to hit-outs to advantage. It won't be one ruckman that dominates hit-outs to advantage. I think they're both going to have their equal share, which might nullify Darcy's score a little bit. But, yeah, Jones can speak a bit about Brayshaw, considering he's a person that's been, you know, traded him pretty highly, I think, this week with a pretty juicy price tag attached to his name.
Funny thing is, I'm bringing both of these men in this week.
Here we go.
So I'm just full sending it. If I had to trade, I like Brayshaw. I think he's like top 6 midfield scoring at the moment. And whilst that's a bit inflated with the 189, he's at 570k, which I think is a bit of a steal. He's 100k cheaper than Oliver. So I'd be looking at, if you're weighing up between those two, I'd be picking Brayshaw purely for the fact that you can do so much with 100k. And I think whilst Oliver probably outscores him, I think that 100k you can definitely make up for the lost points somewhere else. And as for Darcy, I think it's one of those situations where maybe, say you're running a Dixon and Hayes combination, you can chuck the emergency on Hayes on the bench and see how he scores. And if he scores well, then pick Brayshaw and wait off on Darcy. But if he scores really poorly on your bench as emergency, then I'd be looking at bringing in Darcy into the ruck line to prevent that poor Hayes score, which I think will happen because he'll be playing, I think is the Goldstein this week.
Yeah, Goldstein. Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to be going as well as what he did last week against Steph Martin, I want to say. So if I had to rank all three in order, I'd probably go Brayshaw, Darcy, Oliver, purely out of price.
Yeah, I think you had to get on Oliver a couple of weeks ago. I think we touched on this on Monday, Jonas. Oliver, you had to get on him a couple of weeks ago when you were 620k, because he's pretty much back up to his starting price. So Yeah, I'm not sure if you're going to get much value out of Oliver there, but I definitely think Brayshaw at 570k is a good option. Moving on. So this question's actually for me. So I threw this up to you, Jonas, on Monday night, and I still haven't decided. So I'm going to throw this one to Thomas. So I'm tossing up between Hinge, Hugh, and JHF out, and in Rioli or Carroll, Hamilton, and Miller, or out Hinge, JHF, and Hugh, and in Carroll, Rioli, and Brayshaw. I still haven't decided. I've tossed and changed between both of them. But have you got a way that I should go here?
It'd be obviously, it'd be interesting to see what Jonas said. So I wasn't able to listen through the whole potty that you guys did on Monday night, but it's a tough one. Probably, I'd probably say, I'm assuming that the first option with Hamilton is because you're trying to afford Miller.
Yes.
And Rioli, yeah, there you go. So I'd say potentially the first one with the Rioli option rather than the Carroll option. I don't exactly know. Carroll didn't look great against Adelaide. And he seems, as I said, to be playing more of a wing role. And that's in competition with Will Setterfield. So he plays one bad game. I think Setterfield comes back in. Yeah, I'd say that Miller, I think, because if you don't have him, I think Miller's a safer option than Brayshaw just because Miller can pump out these high scores more consistently. Brayshaw does really well against shit teams, goes a bit gangbusters on those ones, but has suffered a little bit with trying to string, consistent, 120s to 130s when Miller's done that for including this year, last 2 years. So I'd probably lean towards option one, but I guess you probably couldn't go wrong with both, realistically.
Yeah. Do you want to just remind Tom what you said, Jonas, about this conundrum?
Yeah, I went early on Carroll. I like going early on rookies that have wraps, and Greg Clark, we obviously know how highly touted he was, and Carroll as well seems to get a lot of love from Carlton fans. So I think he's probably the one I prefer out of all three, given the fact he can rack up the pill. He scored a 95. I think Rioli's like Rose's 2.0. Like, I think I've backflipped on it, and I think I'll be picking Hamilton over Rioli because new coach, they've got nothing really to lose, so they should be playing the younger players. That's my sort of train of thought, and I feel like it only takes one Roses-like game where Rioli scores 20, which I definitely think he is capable of in that role.
I think
to be like a poor option, whereas compared to Rioli.
Yeah, I think Rioli, I was looking at the stats against Collingwood. He didn't score a goal and still managed to score 72, and it was off 14 disposals. So he did pretty well there. I think half of them were contested possessions. So he's one that doesn't mind getting in and under of the contest and really dish him out. And I know Richmond do like their pressure forwards. So he's one that, I don't know, 92 and 72 are pretty impressive. It does look a little bit like Rosas, but the mid-forward eligibility is really helpful, being able to swing him back and forth. And I think if I had to rank the three, I'd probably go 1 Rioli, 2 Hamilton, and 3 Carroll.
I'm like completely the other way around.
So there we go. So there's a difference of opinion. So that's probably done absolutely nothing to help me. So at this stage, I'm leaning towards Miller, and missing out on one of the two. I think Miller's just a little bit more reliable than Brayshaw. And as I said to you earlier, Tom, I'd be happy to let Brayshaw be a top 8 midfielder and burn me. Whereas I think Miller's been there and done it before, so I think I have more trust in him. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting conundrum. So we shall see what I decide to do there. I think we both just answered this question here for me, Lockie. So Carroll or Rioli, so I will skip on that. And top 5 potential vice captain options. Now I actually have a bit of a option that's not on here that I want to get your thoughts on, guys. So for me personally, I'm going to do McRae into Gawn. I think McRae will go gangbusters against Collingwood on Friday night. And I think Gawn against a pretty much ruckless West Coast he could get 170 in this game. So I think that's where I'm leaning towards. But I'll get you guys and see what you're doing, and then I'll throw you my curveball one. I'll go to you first, Tom.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at bringing McRae this week with a boost, I'm pretty sure. So if that's the case,
VC straight on him?
If I go down that route, VC will go straight on him. Slightly concerned that Lipinski might go tag him because obviously Lipinski played for the Dogs and did that against Parrish quite effectively. But I wouldn't say it's a run with roll, it'd be more of a stoppage thing. So I don't think it'd be a big issue. And then captaincy, probably Oliver versus West Coast. Obviously, Neil put out a pretty awkward score against West Coast last week, but I think Oliver just gets the ball for fun, and it'd be pretty hot Brownlow contention. So he'd probably want to rack up 3 Brownlow votes in this game for sure. And he's one that just could go absolutely crazy and score 200. And I think it's just purely because he just gets the ball in every contest rather than impact. Like Neil sometimes goes a little bit quiet and then will impact a game quite ridiculously and score quite large. Whereas I think Oliver could do really well in a pretty, should be a pretty walk in the park for Melbourne. But what are your thoughts, Jonas, on that top 5?
What do we think about Tuke Miller? He went 60 and then got some attention. I feel like Fremantle don't really tag.
No, they're not.
I think Sarong could do some stoppage work on him, but not really any run with role. Sarong's probably your main concern, I'd say. He has done that role in the past.
Because Miller's 3-round average of 127 seems to be finding some form. I feel like this is the sort of game where if he doesn't cop much attention, he could be like a good point of difference BCC selection. But if not, probably just kneel into Oliver. Looks the play.
Yeah.
If you get a loophole, I'm holding Jack Hayes, which will allow me to not really use Neil Oliver actually. So I don't know, I might go on. I don't even know, some pretty horrible options first up. Maybe Jack Crisp or something, or Dunkley. Yeah, probably Dunkley. I'd probably VC and then into Oliver. Yeah, probably that route, but hopefully, or maybe not hopefully, but maybe someone else doesn't play for me who's later on in the week who I can use as a loophole, but we'll see how we go. I don't know if Hewitt will play. I don't know if you guys have touched on him, but he's on the extended bench, which sort of indicates to me he's still touch and go, because if he was like a certainty to play, you'd expect them to just chuck him on the field. So I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I might just...
I think they said earlier in the week that he has to pass the fitness test tomorrow. So I think regardless if they were going to play him on field or not, he had to pass it. So I think that's why he's on the extended bench, because he physically has to pass the test. And that's been stated early in the week. But you could be right.
So my left field captain
lagging out of it for me.
Oh, that's fine. I think we're nearly done. So my left field option is Braden Pruce against Carlton. This is going real left field, but they don't have a ruckman. He's rucking against Dakota. I think Cameron's last game, I think he could dominate this. But anyway, that's my left field one.
Yeah, that's not a bad one, to be fair. I think I wouldn't be surprised if a fair few GWS players do pretty well on that night, considering it's Cameron's last game. Tends to be the case. But yeah, hopefully everyone has a good week, and it'd be an interesting week to see how we go moving into upgrade season with a lot of people looking at a lot of premiums to try and complete their side, and if that's the case, hopefully you'll be pretty much done in the lines that you're hoping to upgrade, and we'll catch you on the other side of round 9, leading into the bye rounds, which will be definitely interesting. But until then, we'll catch you until next time.